Today we have a beautiful poem by John Keats, one of the prominent romantic poets, an ode to a nightingale. John Keats has written several odes: Ode to Melancholy, Ode to a Grecian Urn, Ode to a Nightingale, Ode to Autumn. Ode is simply a lyric poem which expresses a great deal of admiration, praise, love, almost obsession to a particular object, characteristic, season, or person. So let's see. My heart aches and a drowsy numbness pains my sense as though of hemlock I had drunk. So, right in the beginning of the poem, we see that a melancholy tone, a melancholy theme is set. The poet says, my heart aches, my heart is in pain, and a drowsy numbness. I feel numb. My very body and mind feel that, all feeling is retarded or delayed. I feel as if I have drunk hemlock. The word hemlock, now it is a drug. It can also be said as a poison. The word hemlock immediately brings to our mind the story of Socrates, the Greek philosopher. Socrates was commanded by the Greek government to have hemlock, and he was sentenced to die by drinking hemlock, which slowly spread through his body until his heart stopped beating. And we know that Socrates was punished because he was awakening the youth of the land. He was bringing curiosity, he was bringing the questioning nature to them, and that is why he was punished. So here our poet is telling us that I feel as if I have drunk hemlock. So here we go into the background of this poem. Keats, in the year 1819, wrote this amazingly, incredibly beautiful poem, and it is written or stated by his friend Charles Armitage Brown that John Keats had visited him during this period, and the poet, on hearing a nightingale singing in the garden, had taken his chair and his papers and sat down beneath the tree. After a couple of hours, Charles Armitage says that he saw Keats walk back in with a beautiful poem gifted to the world, and that is Ode to a Nightingale. We need to remember the facts that Keats was in deep mourning because it was that very summer that he had lost Tom Keats, his brother, to consumption, tuberculosis, and it was Keats who had nursed his brother throughout that prolonged illness. And he himself later contracted the disease and died at a very early age. He died at the age of 25. So here we see that is why the melancholy tone is set. And we also see that the poet is setting the scene for the Nightingale song. Or emptied some dull opiate to the drains, 1 minute passed and the leafy wards had sunk. Or he says, I have partaken of some dull opiate. Again, opiate or opium is something to numb the senses, a drug. The adjective dull shows yet again the mood of the poem, which is, very really in an almost sad, despondent, depressed kind of mood. He says 1 minute passed and the leather wards had sunk. So the leather wards are the river of forgetfulness in Hades. So we see now allusion to Greek mythology. We see a lot of allusion in Keats' work. Right now, this is an allusion to Greek mythology. He says that this is a river of oblivion, a river of forgetfulness. 'Tis not through envy of thy happy lot, but being too happy in thine happiness, that thou lightwing dried of the trees, in some melodious spot of beech and green, and shadows numberless, singest of summer in full throated ease. Now the poet tells the nightingale, I do not envy you. It is not through envy to you that I am sad, but rather I am too happy in your happiness. I too am partaking of this ecstasy, this exhilaration. That thou light winged dryad, a dryad is a shy tree spirit, a tree spirit that lives among the forest and the woody lands. It is described as a fairy, something like a fairy and a goddess. The nightingale is in a melodious spot, which shows us, here we see the visual imagery as well as the auditory imagery. We can almost hear that musical tones. Keats want us to set the music and of beach and green. Beach and green again is greenery, shrubs, woods, the pastoral scene, we can say. All the romantics, whether it is Wordsworth, Coleridge, Shelley, Byron, all the lake poets, all of them believed in the nurturing ability of nature, the beauty of nature. And here, when he describes the beach in green and the uh, shadows that are numberless shadows in it, so all the the branches of the trees, all of it is lending a mystic air to this particular melodious spot. Oh, for a draught of vintage that hath been cooled a long age in the deep delved earth, tasting of flora and of the country green, dance in provincial song and sunburnt mirth. So now the poet says he is desiring to be drunk or to partake of some intoxicating drink. He says some fine wine that has long been deep in the deep dwelt earth, something that has been fermented for so long. Alcohol, intoxication. Now, these are the words that come to our mind. The poet wishes to forget himself, he wishes to escape. So, again, the word escapism, that is what we need to remember here. Tasting of flora, and this wine should taste of the flora, the flowers, the very woody atmosphere of that particular area. Provincial is a particular area. So, and that sunburnt mirth, it should taste and smell of the happiness of the people who live there. Oh, for a beaker full of the warm south, full of the true, the blushful Hippocrene. Hippocrene, again the allusion to the steed's fountain on Mount Helicon. The fountain is also one that carries people into oblivion, to forget their present selves. Again, Greek mythology. With beaded bubbles winking at the brim. The words beaded bubbles and brim is assonance. So the devices so far used are metaphor, imagery, and now assonance with BBB, three times beaded bubbles at the brim. And purple stained mouth that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim. So here the poet wishes to drink this intoxicating drink and fade away. He wants to be away from his present world. We know that he is in mourning. He does not want to think of the temporal earth, the earth that is not permanent, the material earth on which man's life is a constant struggle. Fade far away, dissolve and quite forget what thou among the leaves hast never known. The words fade, dissolve, forget, all of them show us that the poet wishes to escape or disappear from this particular space. And he says that the nightingale has never known anything sad in his life. The nightingale is in full throated ease, in extreme ecstasy, singing, from in a deep throated happiness, while the poet desires to be taken away into the world of the nightingale. And he says the nightingale has never known something. Let us see what that is. The weariness, the fever, and the fret, here where men sit and hear each other groan, where palsy shakes a few sad last grey hairs, where youth grows pale and spectre thin and dies, where but to think is to be full of sorrow and leaden-eyed despair, where beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pine at them beyond tomorrow. So the poet now describes the temporal earth which he inhabits. It is so different from that of the nightingale. He says that in this earth, youth, young people become spectator and they die. This is definitely about consumption, tuberculosis, that was taking away young people at a very young age. We know that Keats had just seen death and he was also looking on the death that was impending for himself. And palsy is a condition where the body starts shaking, and these old men are the old people are subjected to palsy, and the few gray hairs that are left on their body are shook by this pain and discomfort and all the misery and pain that human life has. He says to even think is to be filled with sorrow. Keats says that beauty cannot keep her lustrous eyes, or new love pine at them. At this period, Keats was himself in love with a young woman, and he had to part from her. At the end of his life, he moves away to the south in order to get treatment, and from that, he never recovers and never comes back. So, in that journey, his love too is not fruitful, though he does exchange a great many letters to his lady love, and of it are born amazingly beautiful poems. But he knows that even love cannot live on in this world. This brings to mind Hamlet, Shakespeare's Hamlet, who is also, when he speaks to Ophelia, we see how he too pines about the fact that their love cannot bear fruition in this world. Away, away, for I will fly to thee, not charioted by Bacchus and his parts, but on the viewless wings of poesy. This particular line, the viewless wings of poesy, I think is one of the most important phrases in this poem. Because until now we saw our poet was despondent. He did not know if he did not know whether he would be able to reach the nightingale. He was thinking of opium, he was thinking of hemlock and intoxicating wine. But now we see him utterly confident. He is in his home space, and here he speaks of imagination. One of the most important words as far as the romantics were concerned is imagination. The poetic inspiration, the poetic imagination to create an alternate universe which is as beautiful or even more beautiful than the one we live in. Coleridge in his Kubla Khan speaks of the poet who is able to build something far greater than that which Kubla Khan is building. That great palace, that palatial mansion, nothing amounts to the poem that Coleridge is going to write. And this is the same that we see whether it is Shelley or Wordsworth. And here Keats says, I will come to you, Nightingale, on the viewless wings of poesy. I will fly towards you, but that will be through poetry. The imagination that is seen in the romantic poetry. We can also say that his lines are very sensuous. That is another feature of Keats. All his lines, every bit of his poetry is sensuous imagery, not merely pastoral, but so feelingful. There is a feeling in every word. Though the dull brain perplexes and retards, already with thee tender is the night, and happily the queen moon is on her throne, clustered around by all her starry face. But here there is no light, save what from heaven is with the breezes blown, through verdurous glooms and winding mossy ways. Now the poet says that the brain is perplexed, the brain is confused, and retarded, that means it is delayed in thought. But I am already with you. On the viewless wings of poesy, I have reached you, beloved nightingale. The moon is tender, the night is tender, the moonlight is, being showered on the world. We are reminded of Derosio. Derosio is a walk in the moonlight, where the moonlight is making everything celestial and mystic around the poet. And the queen moon, the moon is personified. So the next device we need to note down is personification. The moon is personified and she is surrounded by the starry phase. Phase is an archaic term for fairies. The stars are described as fairies surrounding the moon. But here, where the poet is sitting, there is no light. There is no light symbolically as well as in reality. There is no light. The nightingale is sitting in a dense forest, woody area. He says, only that light which heaven brings forth. So we see the poetic inspiration or this imagination is given such a heavenly status. This is what will help our poet to get away from his own despondent self, something that will give him a reason to live. I cannot see what flowers are at my feet, nor what soft incense hangs upon the boughs, but in embalmed darkness guess each sweet wherewith the seasonable month endows. The poet now says that he cannot see what flowers fall at his feet. The flowers smell heavenly, they are so fragrant. These words like incense, fragrance, and the relating to smell gives the olfactory imagery. So this is a very well-rounded picture. You know what smells are there. There is a lot of mention of various kind of flowers, and flowers make us think of birth, of love, a lover presenting a bouquet of flowers to his beloved, or death, a funeral where flowers are planted at the deathbed. So flowers signify the change or the cycle of life, and we see a lot of flowers are mentioned. The grass, yeah, embalmed. The word embalmed is also related to death. So here also we are constantly there is a shadow of death we can see in these lines. The grass, the thicket, and the fruit tree wild, white hawthorn, and the pastoral eglantine, fast fading violets covered up in leaves, and mid May's eldest child, the coming musk rose, full of dewy wine, the murmurous haunt of flies on summer eves. So, all these beautiful aspects of nature are described, the May flowers, the fast fading violets, the white hawthorn, the eglantine. So, all these flowers. Now, here we are made to ask ourselves a question. Personally, I feel, is the poet asking us whether nature will suffice to take us away from our mystery? Did Keats too believe, like Wordsworth, that nature could be a nurse, a muse, to take us away from our sorrows? Because nature in all her glory is presented here. Darkling, I listen, and for many a time I have been half in love with easeful death, called him soft names in many amused rhyme, to take into the air my quiet breath. Now, here death is personified. The poet says, I have quite often conversed with death. I have spoken to death and I have called out to death. Death here seems to be a person coming to fetch our poet's soul. And the poet says that now that he has listened to the nightingale, he feels that uh, this would be a good time to die. He has listened to this beautiful music, this heavenly notes, and he does not mind giving his soul up. Throughout these lines, we are reminded of Shakespeare's Hamlet. Hamlet, too, we see how he says that death that death would be a consummation devoutly to be wished. So Hamlet is calling out to death for that consummation, that sensual consummation. And Keats too says that death would be welcome. Now more than ever seems it rich to die. It is a rich moment to die, to seize upon the midnight with no pain, while thou art pouring forth thy soul abroad in such an ecstasy. Still wouldst thou sing, and I have ears in vain, to thy high requiem become a sword. Here the poet says that even if I die, you will continue singing, O nightingale, and your song years will be in vain, for I would have passed away, I would be dead, and I would no longer hear your music. Your music then would become a requiem. A requiem is a dirge, a poem, or a song which is sung at a deathbed, at a funeral, almost a prayer, a choir song in a church. So this dirge which you will sing for me, that will be, he describes himself as a sword. This is a very self effacing way of our poet of telling that he has become a clump of mud or earth, he has returned back to earth. So there will be no more pain. And this too, like Hamlet says, that all the temptations of the flesh will cease. Just as Shakespeare says that all temptation of the flesh will cease, Keats too says, to seize upon the midnight with no pain. All pain will disappear. All the pain that is of this temporal earth will disappear in death. Thou was not born for thou thou was not born for death, immortal bird. No hungry generations tread thee down. Now the bird is becoming not just the bird on the tree, but that symbolic bird who has become Keats' inspiration. He says, this poetic inspiration, it has no death. This inspiration, this imagination is immortal. This is for all time. And no hungry generations will tread thee down. Nothing is there to weary thee down, to wear thee down. That is the meaning of the word tread. To walk you down, or to simply destroy you or make you weary. The voice I hear this passing night was heard in ancient days by emperor and clown. So, this imagination that has come to me today, this was heard by so many generations before me. Emperors and clowns, jesters who have, sung songs to amuse kings, and kings who have built great palaces. They have all been driven by this very same imagination. Perhaps the self-same song that found a path through the sad heart of Ruth when sick for home. She stood in tears amid the alien corn, the same that oft times. So here again we see allusion to a particular character. The name given is Ruth. Keats says that maybe it is this very self-same song, the song of the nightingale, the song of inspiration, that has come to Ruth when she stood in an alien land. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, there is mention of an Israelite woman called Ruth, who, uh, along with her mother-in-law, who is widowed, Naomi, goes to a far-off land, and in order to earn her livelihood, she is working in a foreign land and among foreign people. So, was this inspiration that led her to stay on, to live for, to work for a living? This is what Keats is wondering. Now, the Bible does not mention that Ruth was forlorn, and so we can also take it that this is Keats' imagination, that Ruth may have been homesick. Again, the word Ruth can also remind us of Wordsworth's Solitary Reaper. In Solitary Reaper, we see a single lady standing amidst the corn and working alone, the reaper. And Wordsworth also has a poem which is called Ruth. The character herself is a lady called Ruth. So it could be any of these. All of these can come to our mind. But the poet is showing us the importance of poetry. Poetry quite often gives us a reason to live. Poetry is not like any other innovation or invention that allows us to earn a livelihood, but rather gives us reason to live. Poetry or philosophy, and the most beautiful philosophy, of course, is poetry. Poetry comes to man to aid him, to nurture him. And this is a theme that is continuously seen in all the romantic poets. And Keats, we have to note, especially gave a lot of importance to beauty. His most famous lines are, "Truth is beauty, beauty truth. That is all ye know and all ye need to know." Keats, throughout his letters, has also given a lot of poetic philosophy in which he mentions a negative capability. That is the feeling of a man when he is surrounded by beauty and all the mystery of the universe. When he feels one with the universe, Keats defines it as a feeling in which he need not ask questions. He need not ask where this beauty has come from or why this beauty or this nature is surrounding him. He did not go to analyze the source of it or the meaning of it, but rather said that that beauty, to be simply aware of it, to be simply contained in it, will suffice. Unlike the other romantic poets who maybe tried to define this beauty, Keats never defined but rather worshipped the beauty and enjoyed it and appreciated it. So, some of the words that we need to keep in mind is imagination, fantasy land, fancy, and that alternate universe. Then, definitely nature. Nature is throughout a very significant force. And there are again we see the two sides. On one side we have life, on the other side we have death. On one hand we have the temporal material earth, and on the other side we have that supreme elated mystical sensation, that elevated plane where man's spirit goes far above all that is earthly. So all through we see that threshold between the two worlds. Charmed magic casements opening on the foam of perilous seas in fairy lands forlorn. So this Nightingale song is heard in the charmed magic casements and treasure hunts. All that man does, all his ambition, everywhere this inspiration is seen. It is opening on the foam and perilous seas. This is again symbolic of all the hurdles that are present in man's life. In fairy lands forlorn. Forlorn. Suddenly, the poet brings forth this word, which is again a very significant word in his poetry. Forlorn, the very word is like a bell. It is a pitifully sad or, abandoned feeling to be forlorn. And it is like a bell that strikes to bring our poet back to his earthly home. He is back to his home and he must face all the reality around him. To toll me back from thee to my soul self, I am taken back from you, beloved Nightingale. Adieu, the fancy cannot cheat so well as she is famed to do, deceiving elf. Now he calls fancy a deceiving elf. An elf again is a fantasy creature. And fancy is yet another word very much to connote imagination. He says that imagination or fancy cannot take us too far away. She's a deceiving elf, and for some time we can forget our worries. Quite often, when we are worried, when we are distressed, and we look upon a beautiful natural landscape or we read a lovely poem, we are taken away from our present sadness. But ultimately, we cannot stay in that alternate universe forever. We need to come back and we need to face the reality. So he says that fancy, though she is so famous for taking us out of our grief, She is a deceiving elf. She will bring us right back to the earthly home. Adieu, adieu. Adieu is to say goodbye. The plaintive anthem fades. He says that, this sad anthem of yours, suddenly, when the poet is back in his homeland, you notice that the notes of the nightingale, rather than filled with ecstasy, become sad, plaintive notes, and it is slowly fading away. The poet is back into the real world. Past the near meadows, over the still stream, up the hillside, and now is buried deep in the next valley glades. He again describes, and the stream becomes still, and all that pastoral setting around him is still beautiful. And we see that all these inanimate objects, when Keats sings of them, they seem to be filled with life, brimming with light. Was it a vision or a waking dream? Fled is that music, do I wake or sleep? And yet again, our poet asks, do I wake or do I sleep? What is it that I just heard? Could it be a dream or could it be reality? Again, we see the life and death, and our poet standing on the threshold of that door, looking into both the worlds of life and death. He is wondering whether he has dreamt. Could all this be one beautiful dream? Is it just a dream? And do I wake or do I sleep? So throughout we see the ode is a high praise of the nightingale song, which is symbolically also poetic inspiration. The lines, there are 10 lines in each stanza. The first four is a quatrain, the next six is a sestet. Then we see the devices like personification, imagery, visual, olfactory, auditory imagery. There is assonance in several places, use of the same letter, vowels. Thank you.